You know, it's funny how we trick ourselves. A 10-year perfect safety record shouldn't be the thing that kills you. But on a pitch black night in 1997 off the coast of Australia, a flawless history of success actually convinced a ship's captain to allow a helicopter maneuver that he knew deep down was incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, it's that comforting assumption we make in our daily lives, right? Like if we've done something 100 times without getting hurt, it simply must be safe.
Exactly. And today we're doing a deep dive into how that illusion of routine can mask deadly risks. We're looking at a specific fatal maritime aviation accident. This happened on February 25th, 1997, right near Gladstone, Queensland.
Right.
And for this deep dive, we're pulling from the official Australian Transport Safety Bureau aviation reports, the Department of Transport and Marine Casualty reports, and some really detailed technical analyses of a collision between a Hughes 500 helicopter and this massive cargo vessel, the MV Cape Arnhem.
And when you synthesize all those sources, I mean, the picture that emerges is just chilling because the failure wasn't mechanical at all. It wasn't even, a simple misjudgment of distance. The incident shows this catastrophic intersection of environmental constraints, complex aerodynamics, and this psychological phenomenon where past success creates a really dangerous blind spot.
So let's unpack this. Let's set the scene.
Yeah.
Gladstone in 1997 was this massively busy industrial hub on the central coast of Queensland. They're pushing vast amounts of coal, alumina, general cargo out to sea. And because a ship sitting idle is basically just burning money, they did not want to stop the vessels to transfer marine pilots.
Right. And just for context, marine pilots are the local navigation experts. They're the ones who guide these massive ships through, the treacherous harbor waters.
Exactly. So instead of using a pilot boat, which, would force the huge cargo ship to drastically reduce its speed, they used helicopters to just drop the marine pilots directly onto the moving decks.
Yeah, and the efficiency of that was so good it just became standard practice. But the Cape Arnhem presented a completely unique environment. I mean, this was a 165.5-meter-long general cargo and container ship.
Which is huge.
It's massive. And most of these shipboard helicopter transfers, they happen on flat, wide-open bulk carriers.
Right, with those big open decks.
Exactly. Massive, unobstructed decks where a pilot can just come in, hover, lower a winch, and leave. But the Cape Arnhem was completely different. The deck was basically a labyrinth. It had masts, superstructure, and these massive pedestal cranes located right on the center line.
And the master of the Cape Arnhem, the captain, he took one look at his own deck and expressed some really serious hesitation. He did not think his ship was suitable for a helicopter to even attempt a landing.
Yeah, he knew the risks.
But he was ultimately overruled by the ship's agent and actually the marine pilot himself. They pointed out that the local helicopter operator had a 10-year perfect safety record doing these exact night transfers.
And that 10-year record is exactly what became the trap. I mean, in safety engineering, there's this concept called the normalization of deviance.
Normalization of deviance.
Right. So the marine pilot and the local operators, they basically used the fact that they had successfully done hundreds of night transfers to justify doing it again. But they completely failed to account for the unique geometry of the Cape Arnhem.
Yeah, they assumed that the margin for error they had on those wide-open bulk carriers would just somehow stretch to fit a highly cluttered container ship.
Exactly.
Think of it like driving a large truck into your home garage by sound alone. If you park a small sedan in that exact garage every single day for 10 years and you never scratch the paint, you develop this feeling of absolute competence.
Oh, totally.
But if you try to park an oversized truck in the exact same space using that exact same muscle memory, that past success is actually what causes the crash because your mental model just doesn't match the new physical reality at all.
That is a perfect analogy. The safety buffer just degraded invisibly. The local operators, they failed to do a fresh, objective risk assessment. They were entirely blinded by their own operational momentum.
They just saw the perfect record and stopped asking why they had been successful in the past.
Right. They confused good luck with a robust safety system.
So let's get into the physical reality of what they were actually dealing with on the night of February 25th. The helicopter was a Hughes 369 HS, which pretty much everyone calls the Hughes 500.
Yeah, classic machine.
Very classic. It's an incredibly agile, high-performance machine, powered by a turboshaft engine, famously responsive, which is exactly why it's so popular for tight shipboard work. So it's AL1.12 AM, pitch black sky. The Cape Arnhem has left the harbor and is steaming out toward the fairway buoy at 14.5 knots.
And that forward speed, that 14.5 knots, that is non-negotiable for the ship.
Why is that?
Because a vessel of that size, it needs water moving swiftly past its rudder just to maintain steering control. If it slows down too much, it just drifts. But for the helicopter, that speed creates a highly volatile environment. Because even though the actual weather wind that night was light, you have a massive steel ship driving through the air at 14.5 knots. That generates a very powerful relative wind right over the deck.
Okay, so the crew clears the landing area on the number 2 hatch. That creates a flat space about 25 meters long.
Yeah.
And to make room, they take this massive pedestal crane located right next to the hatch, and they quote-unquote top it.
Yeah.
Meaning they raise the heavy steel job to its absolute maximum upward angle, and they swing it out to the left side of the ship just to get it out of the way.
But in doing that, they inadvertently set a lethal obstacle.
Yeah, they really did.
They hoisted the crane's hook block, which is this solid piece of steel weighing 1.1 tons. They hoisted it all the way up to the cutout position. So that 1.1-ton steel block is now just left hanging, suspended in the air, roughly 20 meters high.
Just dangling there.
And it blended perfectly into the pitch-dark night sky.
At the exact same time, the Marine pilot asks the captain to turn on all the bright deck floodlights to illuminate the landing zone. So the Hughes 500 approaches from the starboard side, lands smoothly on the illuminated 25-meter hatch. The Marine pilot walks out onto the deck, climbs into the helicopter, and straps into the right front seat, right next to the pilot.
So far, the transfer seems totally successful. The helicopter pilot completes his final checks, and he lifts off into a low hover over the hatch. He tilts the nose forward to gain some airspeed, accelerating low across the deck toward the port side. And as he clears the hatch and begins his climb out, he banks the aircraft to the left.
Okay, hang on. The math is really not adding up for me here, because the technical report explicitly states that the Hughes 500 only needed a 16-meter clear zone to operate safely.
Right.
And the ship's crew had cleared a 25-meter space on the hatch, so they had almost 10 meters of excess clearance.
Yeah, plenty of room on paper.
Exactly. So how does a pilot simply hit a crane when the blueprint says he has plenty of room to fly straight up and away? Did he just ignore the math?
Well, the blueprint calculation is a prime example of what we call the still air fallacy. It is really easy to look at a static two-dimensional drawing and assume a helicopter just behaves like an elevator.
Oh, sure. Going straight up.
Right. But a helicopter hovering over a ship that is moving at 14.5 knots is not flying in still air.
Yeah.
It is operating inside a chaotic, turbulent system called an air wake.
An air wake.
Yeah. Think of a fast-flowing river hitting a massive boulder. The water behind the boulder violently swirls into these unpredictable eddies and vortexes, right?
Right. The white water.
Exactly. The massive superstructure of the Cape Arnhem was acting like that boulder. It was shredding the relative wind into these invisible, turbulent downward and upward drafts straight over the deck.
Oh, wow. So as the pilot lifts off, he isn't just steering. He's actively battling unseen aerodynamic forces that are pushing and pulling the aircraft completely off its intended path.
Yes. And furthermore, his visual cues were severely compromised.
Because the lights.
Yes, the deck floodlights were intensely bright. They illuminated the hatch like a football stadium. But remember that 1.1-ton steel block? It was 20 meters up, hanging entirely outside that pool of light.
Oh, man.
So the sheer intensity of the deck lights below completely destroyed the pilot's night vision. When he looked up into the darkness as he banked left, the unlit, dark-painted block was just optically invisible against the black sky.
So he was flying blind into a literal obstacle while fighting chaotic invisible wind currents.
That's exactly what happened.
So at 01.12 a.m., the main rotor of the helicopter strikes the seaward face of that suspended hook block, and the main rotor of a Hughes 500 spins with a tip speed of over 700 kilometers per hour.
Yeah, the kinetic energy involved there is almost unimaginable. The physics of that impact are instantaneous and just devastating.
I can't even picture it.
Well, when composite rotor blades traveling at 700 kilometers an hour hit a fixed 1.1-ton steel object, the blades shatter immediately. But all that deceleration transfers massive kinetic energy directly back down the mast and into the transmission. The force was enough to physically tear the entire rotor head apart.
And the destruction doesn't even stop at the blades. Because a turboshaft engine doesn't just switch off instantly, right?
No, not at all. The turboshaft engine was still at full throttle, generating immense torque designed to spin that rotor system.
Right.
When the rotor suddenly hit a steel wall and stopped, That rotational energy had literally nowhere to go.
Wow.
So, following Newton's third law, the engine torque violently twisted the entire fuselage of the helicopter in the opposite direction.
Oh my God.
Yeah, the aircraft pivoted counterclockwise with such force that the tail swung around and smashed into the exact same steel block, instantly destroying the tail rotor too.
So completely stripped of all lift and directional control, the shattered helicopter rolls to the right, flips entirely upside down, and plunges into the sea just 20 meters away from the ship's hull.
It was incredibly fast.
And this brings us to a terrifying irony regarding the safety equipment on board. Because the Hughes 500 was equipped with emergency utility floats. These are designed to trigger upon water impact and keep the aircraft from sinking.
And here's the thing, the utility floats functioned exactly as designed. They deployed and inflated perfectly.
Wait, really? But they crashed.
Yeah, the problem was the orientation of the aircraft. Those floats are engineered to stabilize a helicopter that lands upright on the surface of the water.
So it's like putting a life jacket around your ankles instead of your chest. I mean, the buoyancy is technically doing its job, but because the orientation is inverted, the physics of the safety device actually force the heavy cabin and your head entirely underwater.
Exactly. The floats kept the overturned hull bobbing right near the surface, but they essentially pinned the submerged cockpit beneath the water level, so it trapped the occupants inside this inverted, dark, flooding cabin.
The Marine pilot was strapped into his multi-point harness. Disoriented by the impact, the sudden rush of cold water, the pitch blackness, he was unable to unbuckle and navigate his way out of that submerged cabin.
Yeah.
And he tragically drowned.
Yeah.
But the helicopter pilot miraculously managed to free himself, escape the sunken cockpit, and was actually later found clinging to the upturned belly of the aircraft.
Which is incredible survival, but then you have to look at the rescue response.
Right, because if a helicopter crashes 20 meters from a massive cargo ship with a full crew, you'd assume rescue operations would commence in seconds.
You'd think so.
The master of the ship did immediately call Gladstone port control. He ordered the engine stopped, and he mustered the emergency crew. Yet the Marine casualty report reveals this staggering fact. It took the crew 22 minutes to simply launch the lifeboat.
And in the context of a maritime water rescue, 22 minutes is an absolute eternity.
Especially because at 14.5 knots, a heavy cargo ship carries massive forward momentum. It does not have brakes.
Yeah.
By the time Cape Arnhem finally bled off its speed and lost forward momentum, it had coasted miles away from the crash site into the darkness.
Yeah, and the official investigation heavily criticized the ship's master for failing to execute a standard maritime recovery maneuver. It's known as a Williamson turn.
How does that work?
So the Williamson turn is a very specific foundational maneuver that is taught to mariners for man-overboard scenarios. You basically put the ship's rudder hard over to one side until the vessel's heading deviates a specific number of degrees from its original course.
Okay.
Then you swing the rudder hard over to the opposite side. And the physics of that turn perfectly bring the massive ship back around onto its exact reciprocal track.
Oh, so it effectively drives the vessel straight back down its own wake to the precise spot where the incident occurred.
Exactly. It's brilliant when executed properly. But because the master simply ordered the engine stopped instead of driving the ship back down its own track, the Cape Arnhem just drifted helplessly far away from the trapped men.
And ironically, it wasn't even the ship's lifeboat that arrived on scene first. A local fishing vessel named the Serenity just happened to be operating in the area, saw the commotion, and navigated to the wreckage. They pulled the surviving helicopter pilot from the water at 01:44 a.m. That is more than half an hour after the impact.
And, you know, the delay in the rescue wasn't just a matter of a captain forgetting a steering maneuver in a panic. The investigation exposed a severe cultural disconnect on the ship.
What do you mean?
Well, the Cape Arnhem was manned by 26 Yugoslavian crew members, and they were completely untrained in aviation operations. They had never been drilled on how to respond to a helicopter crash.
Oh, not once.
Never. So imagine standing on a dark deck, suddenly witnessing this explosion of rotor blades, and having absolutely no protocol to fall back on. They were entirely unprepared spectators on their own ship. Their reaction was uncoordinated because the maritime and aviation protocols were totally siloed from each other.
But the fact that the crew stood by helplessly, that wasn't just a Cape Arnhem problem, was it? It was a symptom of a much wider, darker reality in 1997.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when you review the broader safety climate of that year, the utility helicopter industry was bleeding. I mean, just 3 weeks before this Gladstone crash, the deadliest air disaster in Israel's history occurred when 2 military transport helicopters collided in midair at night, killing 73 people.
And while a military transport collision in the Middle East might seem far removed from a civilian marine pilot transfer in Australia, the underlying mechanisms of those disasters were chillingly identical.
How so?
Both involved the immense pressures of nighttime operations, both involved helicopters operating in close proximity to unseen hazards, and both involved pilots trying to navigate complex, turbulent airspaces while their visual cues were severely degraded by darkness and just really inadequate lighting protocols.
Yeah, the ATSB reports from that era note a massive spike in low-level obstruction crashes within Australia as well.
Yeah.
I mean, a Hughes 269C suffered a fatal wire strike near Tully. A Robinson R-22 crashed during a nighttime precautionary landing in the Northern Territory. Another Hughes 500 was destroyed striking a power line during low-level agricultural work. It really begs the question, why were so many utility helicopters falling out of the sky in such a short window of time?
Well, that spike occurred because the utility helicopter sector was undergoing this rapid industrialization.
Right.
These aircraft were increasingly being asked to perform highly complex military-style night operations to support round-the-clock industrial demands like, keeping coal ships moving 24/7.
Yeah.
However, the safety regulations governing them were still entirely rooted in outdated civilian daytime flight rules. They were operating in the dirt of the airspace, right? Low altitudes, near unlit structures, wires, moving ships. And they were just relying on informal handshakes and gentlemen's agreements regarding safety margins.
Yeah, and the investigations by the Bureau of Air Safety Investigation, the Aviation Authority, and the Department of Transport, they realized they couldn't just blame the pilot for banking left or the captain for missing a turn.
No, you can't.
The real villain was the system itself. They identified the most glaring systemic failure as the total absence of a helicopter landing officer, or HLO, on the deck of the ship.
Yeah, the HLO serves as the critical bridge between the marine environment and the aviation environment.
What exactly do they do?
So if a trained HLO equipped with a radio had been standing on the port side of that hatch, their sole job would have been to monitor the clearance between the helicopter's rotor disc and the ship's superstructure.
Oh, I see.
They would have seen the aircraft drifting into that turbulent airway toward the hidden steel block, and they could have instantly radioed the pilot to abort the maneuver. But without an HLO, the pilot was operating entirely in a vacuum, completely blind to the external environment.
You often hear that the regulations governing how we work today are written in blood. When we observe stringent safety protocols at our own jobs, we are usually looking at the institutional memory of a tragedy. And the legacy of the Cape Arnhem collision is that it forced immediate, sweeping reform. It ended the era of informal assumptions and dragged the maritime aviation industry into an era of strict, standardized regulation.
It really did. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority, AMSA, they immediately reissued Marine Orders Part 57, and they imposed these non-negotiable mandates. Ship crews could no longer just be passive spectators. They were legally required to undergo rigorous training in helicopter emergencies.
Right.
Ships were mandated to have specific fire suppression and rescue gear physically staged and manned right on the deck during any transfer.
And the aviation sector implemented equally aggressive changes too. They mandated helicopter underwater escape training, commonly known as HUET, for all marine pilots.
Which is huge.
Teaching them exactly how to unbuckle and escape an inverted, flooded cabin in pitch darkness. They mandated the installation of jettison systems for cockpit doors. They increased the minimum clear landing site dimensions to a strict 20 meters. Furthermore, they required helicopters to be fitted with 400,000 candle-powered downward-facing searchlights.
Yeah, and those were designed specifically to pierce through the glare of ship deck lights and illuminate unlit obstacles in the night sky.
And they also instituted a seemingly simple rule. Ships were mandated to fly a windsock or a pennant near the landing zone.
Yes, and that requirement perfectly encapsulates the broader lesson here. Safety is not a static destination you arrive at after 10 years of good luck.
No.
The moment the environment changes, the moment you move from a wide bulk carrier to a cluttered cargo ship, the risk profile resets to zero. Risk must be actively managed and continuously reassessed on every single operation, especially when the margins for survival are dictated by invisible aerodynamics and unlit steel.
Well, thank you for walking through the mechanics of that tragedy with us. And to you listening, thank you for joining this deep dive. The ATSB Marine Report actually includes a detail that is incredibly difficult to shake, and we want to leave you with it.
Yeah, this part really gets you.
Investigators pointed out that if the ship's crew had simply tied a low-tech wind pennant, literally just a cheap piece of fabric, to the bottom of that suspended 1.1-ton crane hook, the outcome would have been entirely different. That simple piece of cloth would have accomplished two things instantly.
Right.
First, it would have fluttered violently, making the chaotic, invisible air turbulence shedding off the superstructure immediately visible to the helicopter pilot. And second, it would have physically marked the location of the unlit steel block hiding in the darkness above the floodlights. It really challenges us to look at the complex systems we rely on every day. How often do we put our faith in expensive technology, perfect safety records, and assumptions of routine, when a simple, low-tech pennant in the wind might be the one thing that actually saves our lives?